Hello and welcome to Business Daily on Trust Television, where we'll bring you factual conversation and in-depth analysis on developments in the world of business, finance, investment, basically telling you what goes on in Nigeria's economic space. I am your host, Christiana Amodu Otinya. Thank you for joining in. Now, all eyes yesterday was focused on the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Indeed, we saw that decision coming from the MPC talking about the hiking of the MPR and the CRR. A lot of people have said that the CBN is being aggressive towards reining in inflation. Inflation currently doing over 20% in the country. And the CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, did say that the CBN will not relax on its oars. It will work assiduously to ensure that it brings down the high inflation currently in the country, as that's within the purview of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And we also saw that the decision from the MPC did reflect how that can be achieved. Now, according to the communique that was read by the CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele at the end of the two-day meeting, the committee agreed to raise monetary policy rate and cash reserve requirements, MPR 15.5% and CRR to 32.5%. I will be joined in the course of the program today by two erudite heavyweights in the economic space, and they will be lending their voice as regards to the decision we saw from the MPC, talking about how this will affect Nigerians, because Nigerians then again are concerned. How does the MPR affect me as a person that goes about running my business, or as a person that goes about running my daily activities? Beyond the numbers, how can we also humanize this rate and how it will trickle down to majority of Nigerians? We'll tell you much more on this when we start the conversation segment of the program today. I'll take a short breather. When I return, the program will continue and you'll get to meet my guest. Please stay.
Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Welcome back to the program, and thank you for still staying there with us on the program. Now it's time to kickstart the conversation segment of the program today. I'm being joined by my guests in the studio. I have two gentlemen here with me. From my very close left here, Professor Mike Obadon. He's a professor of economics, also a member of the Monetary Policy Committee and a non-executive director at the Central Bank of Nigeria. And to my far left, we have Dr. Muhammad Hosseini, former director at the NDIC, the managing director and chief executive officer, Muregi Associates, and he's also a lecturer. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Prof, I think I'm going to begin with you because as a member of the MPC, you were in the room. We were not there when this whole the whole decision was reached, and we saw the governor read out the decisions from the communique yesterday. I want you to take us through that process.
Well, thank you very, very much. Let me say that it was a relatively hard decision because of the circumstances. The committee was faced by a serious threat to its primary mandate, that is to say, to the primary mandate of the bank which is ensured, as it were, through the Monetary Policy Committee. And that primary mandate is for the Central Bank of Nigeria to ensure at all times monetary and price stability, including, of course, exchange rate stability, which, will help to ensure macroeconomic stability, which is good for investment, which is good for business, and which is also good for the standard of living of the ordinary, citizens and others. When there are stable prices,
Yes.
Inflation is low, the citizens are happy because the purchasing power of their money is not threatened, is fairly stable. But when there is instability in prices, particularly, the price level, you see, the purchasing power or buying power of the citizens' money become gradually eroded, and the citizens become poorer and poorer in terms of the quantum of goods that their money can buy. And investors too become very unhappy because price instability is a major element of macroeconomic instability, which tends to deter investment. It deters investors, so also is exchange rate instability. And so at the point the decision was taken, yesterday, it was clear that the inflation rate was moving in a rather runaway fashion. You could imagine that the inflation rate in February this year was about 15.7%.
Yes.
And by August, some months later, it had escalated to 20.52%. And you will agree with me that the citizens are already complaining openly that the rate at which prices were increasing was hurting them, hurting their savings, hurting what they can buy.
Yes.
And there's so much uncertainty.
Prof, let me hold you on your thoughts and bring Dr. Muhammad Hussaini here into the conversation. Doctor, I know you follow the whole economic space and follow news that come out from the space. How did you react to the decision when we saw the rate hike from the Central Bank of Nigeria? That's talking about the Monetary Policy Committee.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us. It is good that Prof himself is here. He's a member of that MPC. My reaction, believe me sincerely, is a little bit not too good.
Okay.
Why? Because policies are made for people. If you look at the inflationary rate today, let's say 15.5%, according to CBN, but you and I know what it is outside there. Inflation today is over 20-something%. Now, you as an individual, you go to the market now, how much does Indomie cost compared to last year? Sugar, ordinary goods and services. Now, CBA's mandate, like Prof said, is price stability. Is that being achieved? The answer is no. Nobody can claim that price stability is the in thing today. And CBN itself, locally, they said it yesterday. In spite of their intervention in the last 3 MPC, Prof is here, he can contradict that. In the last 3,
Yes.
inflation is still going higher and higher and higher. So what do? We need to do something by way of doing something extraordinary, not following, continuously raising interest rate. Continuous raising interest rate will not solve that problem. That's my take on that. And I think as we go along,
Yes.
You look at Germany in 1920.
Yes.
All right? You look at Zimbabwe. What did they do? We have examples. Prof should know better as a professor of economics.
Prof,
we
doctor is laying the book
hold on.
at your table now.
Well, yeah, because it's luckily, I think Prof is here, and
Yes.
he's a member of those institutions.
Yes.
CBN, believe me sincerely, has not done what it's supposed to do, and they know what they're supposed to do.
Prof, I want you to come into this discussion now, because I followed analysis after we got the announcement by the CBN governor talking about the hike in the MPR, 15.5%, and the CRR, 32.5%. Now, doctor is saying this is not the proper, or this is not the way that will really bring about the needed change we need, because inflation then again affects everybody's pockets. And you mentioned the fact that as inflation goes up, it erodes purchasing power. I want you to react to the concerns that has been raised by Dr. Mohammed.
Well, Dr. Mohammed made the first point that it's a reaction to the MPC's tight monetary policy stance in opposition, was apparently not favorable. And that in spite of the hikes, the mandate, is not being achieved because price escalations is still going on. Well, and he ended by saying that the CBN has not done what it's supposed to do, and that the bank knows what it should do. Well, let me say that our reaction through the Monetary Policy Committee decisions indicates what we think is good, to ensure stability at this point in time. As they say, a serious illness requires very strong medicine to tackle it. The decisions we took yesterday could be likened to that situation. He is right that the previous hikes have apparently not achieved the desired, result. But I will also say that he knows that such policy decisions, do not become effective very suddenly, soon after they would have been, implemented.
Yes.
There are what, we call policy lags, between the time you introduce a policy, start implementing it, and then the time it would, start yielding desired results.
Yes.
I think we are in that phase with respect to monetary policy, hikes. And that should not make us to rule out the primary instruments for controlling inflation,
Yes.
In every other climb, considering the, source or cause of that inflation. As of today, many, enlightened Nigerians will agree that, some of the triggering factors of inflation in Nigeria are exogenous to the country, over which the Central Bank of Nigeria has no control. The current global inflation is one, over which we cannot have control, or we do not have control. It is something that started immediately after the global economies began to have a handle on COVID-19.
Yes.
And all the huge trillions of dollars they pumped into the system, the economies, to take the economies out of recession, began to be manifest, when COVID-19 measures were being relaxed. There was pent-up demand for goods and services. Once they started spending, people started spending such monies, easy money given to them. You found that inflation started rising
Prof, I
in
want
the other
to
economies.
ask you to land on your thoughts so that, Doctor, I'll come to you.
Can I just, a point of clearance here,
Okay,
or
go ahead,
clarifications
Go
here.
ahead, sir.
One prof said policies don't take an immediate impact. The impact, we all know that. It takes time. But the intervention here, you can never have effective control when you have excess liquidity in the system.
Doctor, I want to hold you on that thought. We want to take a short break.
No.
Let's take a short break, Doctor.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll talk about the excess liquidity issue, mopping it up, and also access to credit.
Yeah.
Let's have that in mind. When we come back, we'll discuss all of that.
Okay.
All right, we'll take a short breather, and when we come back, we'll talk more on the MPC decisions. Please stay. Welcome back, and thank you for still staying there with us. If you're just joining in, this is Business Daily coming to you from Trust Television Studio in the Federal Capital Territory. I still have with me very, very strong gentlemen. I have Professor Mike Obadon, Professor of Economics, member of the Monetary Policy Committee, and a non-executive director at the CBN. And to my far left, Dr. Muhammad Hussaini, former director at the NDIC, MD, CEO, Muregi Associates, and also a lecturer. Prof, just before we went on that short break, you were speaking about issues around excess liquidity.
See, when you want to fight inflation, as is done elsewhere, you do not have too much excess liquidity in the system. If you cannot fight inflation, then control mechanism becomes weaker and weaker and weaker. And then excess lending also to government. These are all things that gives avenue to inflation. If you don't control those two systems, fighting inflation, luckily CBN itself, if you read what the remark yesterday, they said it, in spite of aggressive policies towards this thing, it has not yielded the distance. And what did the IMF said in terms of global growth? Prof should say that because he knows that. He's a professor of economics. He knows that better than I do.
Yeah.
Declining.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right?
Yes.
Growth globally, irrespective of what happens or what is happening, Ukraine, Russia exists. The global economy is going down. And therefore, the mechanism we want to use in the excess liquidity is a serious discipline. And before we come to the air, we were discussing side talk with a prof. The only thing you can fight all these things is what you call creative destruction. Creative destruction, as is done in other parts of the world. And what is this creative destruction? Doing something new, getting old. We cannot sit down and say every moment MPC meets, is inflation. You're doing the same thing. We give you the same result, which they themselves alluded to. So creative destruction implied, that came about some centuries ago by a professor, okay, Peter Schumpeter. He created this thing. For you to create something new, an old thing will have to give way. So in other words, CBN has to rethink, all right, opposite, to do the right thing. And not just be sitting down every month, you're fighting inflation, whereas you and I go to the market, you know the reality on ground. It is not what they are saying.
Prof, I want to quickly just throw the question before you react to some of the things the doctor have said, especially his point on mopping up excess liquidity. The governor did also mention that we saw the margin of the CRR go up because there's too much liquidity that needs to be mopped up. And there was an ultimatum given to bank that's for Thursday to ensure that they comply, or else they will face enforcement. I want you to speak to that decision and also react to some of the creative destruction mechanism that doctor has put forward.
No, I think doctor will have to elaborate on that in the context of the challenge that we have on hand now. But I will say that before I address the issue of excess liquidity,
Yes.
to emphasize
Yes.
the point that a significant proportion of the inflation that we have in Nigeria today is externally driven,
Yes.
exogenously driven. Escalating inflation in the global economy arising from the exigencies of COVID-19, and then the Ukraine-Russian war, which has compounded supply chain disruptions, particularly energy and certain agricultural commodities, particularly food. Prices of these have shot up in the global market, and Nigeria depends on these two items very heavily by way of importation. And once their prices rise there, then to import them to Nigeria, we also import them at very high prices. Yes. So we have a very high element of imported inflation, in Nigeria's inflation. And then, so if you implement in monetary policy measures and they are also not immediately working, is partly because of the exogenous nature of such drivers. And of course, you also have such drivers in Nigeria, like the insecurity, which has, really adversely affected food production and transportation from the food producing areas of the country to different parts of the country. That's not an issue within the purview of the central bank. And the issue of excess liquidity, yes. I agree with Dr. Mohammed that it has a role to play in the current inflation. And that is the major reason why the instruments that have been approved for implementation now are being deployed. We want a situation whereby the excess liquidity is reduced to such a level whereby it does not continue to ignite inflation. And, you cannot do otherwise. You have to raise the monetary policy rate or raise the cash reserve requirements, or do both with a view to, targeting, those aspects of consumer demand that are really not necessary. So you borrow and go and speculate in the foreign exchange market. That is a disservice, to the Nigerian economy, to inflation and all that, or to exchange rate. So though the excess liquidity is being tackled, I also agree with him on the issue of, lending to government, perhaps by ways and means advances. The bank is fully aware of this. And I can assure you that measures have been put in place even before the meeting of yesterday to check the growth of such, borrowing without prejudice to perhaps the needs of government. Okay. But we are now very conscious of the need to take the primary mandate very seriously, because it's the primary mandate. Even when you say central bank has been using development finance interventions, to support growth, that in the first place, that in itself is not the primary mandate. It's ancillary, yes, to the role of the central bank. The bank engages in it primarily because that in itself also supports the mandate of price stability. Because our aim is to tackle inflation from the supply side of goods and services. When aggregate supply increases because enterprises have access to cheap credit at below 10%, and they expand production or initiate new enterprises, they increase the volume of goods and services, and ipso facto, the prices of goods and services, particularly maybe agriculture and others, go down.
Okay, Bob.
So, okay.
Doctor,
can I maybe The point of my a little bit disagreement with Prof is this stability. Stability is the major function.
In terms of price stability?
Yes, of central bank. Central bank does not go about dishing money out here and there, here and there.
So, Doctor, are you against the development financing
I not
mechanism?
primarily say yes, but it should be done limitedly or via an institution. Why will a CBN governor go about become like a minister of agriculture? Why? Why will a CBN governor be following governors of states about doing one thing or the other? That's not the function of CBN all over the world. We know the functions. And I'm saying if for us to do well, we need to do something by creatively. That's what I mean by creative destruction.
Gentlemen.
We need to do something ordinary to make sure the economy, because we're all in together, we're all in it.
I agree.
And something must be done and done
briefly.
I agree, we're all in it. But gentlemen, I want you to give me your final thoughts because we are out of time for the program. So, Doctor, I want you to give me your final thought, 30 seconds. What are your final thoughts? How do we rescue this economy?
CBN is losing gradually the stability function of it, and it must do what it's supposed to do.
Prof.
Okay, I'll just say that the Central Bank of Nigeria is already doing what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
And that the development finance interventions are supportive of the primary mandate of price stability through the supply side. All these other measures, tightening, they tackle the demand. And they tackle the demand side of the equation, and central bank doesn't go about dishing money to individuals. Yeah. Whatever interventions that are done through commercial banks, development banks, central bank. Central bank cannot give money directly to Ministry of Agriculture or all that one because
Prof, I'm afraid we're out of time. Yes,
but otherwise, honestly, some of these issues that Prof is taking up, honestly, they can be challenged.
Yes.
Because we know what is going on.
Doctor, like I said, I'm in the studio with very two heavyweights, so we might have to look for a separate date and a longer time to bring Prof and Doctor to come and slug it out.
Yeah.
He's a professor of economics, you know that.
Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you, Professor Michael Badon, Professor of Economics, member of the MPC, non-executive director at the CBN. Thank you for coming on the program. Dr. Muhammad Hussaini, former director, NDIC, MDC, Omurigi Associate, and also a lecturer. Thank you for lending your voice to the conversation today. And that's where we draw the curtains for the program today. It is pertinent that the Nigerian economy work, and the CBN is also trying on its end. Doctor is saying more needs to be done. You can catch up on all you need to know in the world of business and news making the rounds on our social media platforms for all you need to know. I am Christiana Amodu Otinya. Thank you for joining in and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.